The need for salvation is a very interesting thing, especially when people talk about their independence, their free will. If you need someone to save you, or you need a counter culture or mainstream culture savior, someone who validates your opinions, you're really a slave. Suffering from a disease, and the disease is that you have not understood that the problem is really your belief in external salvation beyond yourself. If you didn't need to feel this desire to have an authority figure or a celebrity or a politician validate and express your feelings, you wouldn't need these saviors in the first place. And this is the root of the problem. We are very carefully controlled from the time we're children to have a sort of the need for a savior.
There is no turning back. You got to face the truth. It's all you have to do. Hit the ground and run. Take a second glance towards the rising sun.
You grow up with that picture of Jesus Christ with his Dionysian beard and long hair, and his softness and his Aryan looks. And you believe that deep in your subconscious that this is someone you need. But you're missing the point completely. Salvation is your own ass. Accept it and please deal with it.
There is no turning back. You got to face the truth. It's all you have to do. Hit the ground and run. Take a second glance towards the rising sun.
Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now. with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. It's the 17th of February 2017. We're past that ridiculous St. Valentine's Day nonsense, really a holiday for kids, but also it's kind of a creepy holiday if you look at the actual story behind it. While I was in Dublin filming for the Occult Dublin documentary, I tried to gain access to the Carmelite College where St. Valentine's bones are worshipped. They're held in a box. I think that there's something quite sinister about the idea of nuns holding bones of males in as relics within these glass boxes. It reminds me of the final scene in the Ken Russell movie The Devils, where Vanessa Redgrave picks up the bone that's left of Oliver Reed and uses it as a dildo. It's almost like this is the darkness behind these seemingly, spiritual or religious ideas. Tonight I wasn't going to do a broadcast, or I had been so busy lately. Editing. I'm writing the second book in the Walpurgis Night series. I'm also editing the first book for a second edition. I want to get a different cover. I wanted the first book in the series and the second book in the series to have the same visual look about them. So I've hired a designer to design the covers for both books of Walpurgis Night, which are coming out. And so I've been doing that. I'm working on some more occult cities or occult geography, documentaries, locations, and so on. So there hasn't been a lot of time to do Velocity of Now broadcasts. But tonight is a bit different. It could almost be seen as an emergency broadcast of sorts in terms of a story that appeared on the BBC website that really is, shall we say, the validation. I always say, shall we say, I've got to stop that, which is really the kind of validation of my long held belief that if there is a battle of Armageddon, it's taking place inside our psyche as we speak. And it won't happen as a battlefield with angels and demons and monsters. It won't happen like Ragnarok, although that may have been based on a real cataclysmic event, which I believe it was. But it also takes place in the psyche. We live in a time where we're not actually warriors. We don't fight in battles with swords. Our battles are predominantly psychological. And the way to defeat us and the way to impose conquest upon us is always going to be a psychological form of warfare. The theater of conflict will be in the psyche. It's not in a battlefield as such. Armageddon, the field of Megiddo, or the valley of Megiddo, that's in your head. That's in your mind. It's in your psyche. It's in your consciousness. Ever since Bernays at the turn of the last century, before World War One, it has the battlefield. It's ironic that the last battle, the last war that was ever fought that involved suicide tactics of attacking the enemy in wholesale numbers was World War One. It was also the end of traditional warfare as mechanized warfare had come in. And so the casualty numbers on both the Western and the Eastern fronts in Europe were colossal because they were using Victorian tactics in order to fight a 20th century warfare. They were using tactics that probably went right back to before the Napoleonic Wars. Fine if you're charging into a group of French muskets where they're taking an average of 9 seconds to reload their musket in a square. No use if you're running into a German machine gun that's shooting diagonally across the Somme and firing several hundred rounds a minute. Doesn't work. And it's ironic that Bernays arrived in America from Vienna with his uncle's ideas at the same time that this war was going. The idea was to get the United States into this war. The Battle of Armageddon really began when Bernays entered the White House with the expressed brief of ending America's alleged, it's never been real anyway, isolationist policy regarding wars in Europe. It's been going on since then, more or less. If you read my Walpurgis Night books, you'll know that the The National Socialists were basically a product of this, as are the Bolsheviks. It's the same war inside the head. This is where it takes place. It doesn't. You already have been conquered, invaded, and defeated. Your beachhead is your five senses. In fact, your whole sensory perception is the beachhead of sorts. As the 20th century progressed, they used, like all wars, there are basically default good things that come out of some wars. Like people brings often, like in England during the Blitz, it brought people closer together, it brought communities closer together. At the height of the depravity of war, there is often great deeds of human valor and self-sacrifice to help the innocent, help refugees escape from, risking your own life. I'm talking about like real refugees like you had in Europe in World War II, not economic refugees that we have today. But anyway, to digress from that. You have a situation where good things happened in this war. You had gay people became acceptable to be, no longer be hiding away, and gay people and homosexuals could become part of society. You had the women's lib. Like people put down Saul Alinsky's book Rules for Radicals, but that was actually a wonderful and necessary book at its time. At the time Rules for Radicals came out, you had Catholics in Northern Ireland were basically second-class citizens, very similar to blacks in many parts of the South under the Jim Crow laws. You had women who, if they worked in government jobs or many corporate jobs, would have to leave if they got married. They couldn't continue their careers. You had gay people as well. You had black people still being lynched from trees in the deep South in the USA. Rules for Radicals, when it came out, was a very necessary book. Something had to be done to shake up the pathological orthodoxy that was inherent in the West at that time. You had apartheid in South Africa. Rules for Radicals and books like that played a huge part in undermining apartheid. So those people who say, they're evil books because he dedicated to Lucifer. Well, the reason why Saul Alinsky dedicated the book to Lucifer was because he was pointing out that Lucifer was the ultimate rebel. He stood up to a bully god. The thing is that with books like Rules for Radicals, they don't work today. They should be seen as templates that serve the purpose over a specific time and were no longer required. They serve their purpose. Apartheid is over. Northern Ireland has its own separate power sharing government. Women now have full equality. Gay people have full equality. They can get married in most countries now. And it's all been sorted. The problem is that some people don't know when a war is over. And you have a lot of these cultural Marxists who have somehow managed to infect the young generation, mainly because they had nothing else in life. A lot of them would be college professors. A lot of them would be academics or the Western intelligentsia. And when the war was over, there was nothing left for them. So they became like the Japanese prisoners of war who were found on islands in the Pacific, the South Pacific, decades after World War II ended. They didn't know the war was over. They had no idea the war was over, and they were guarding this. They were left on these islands and forgotten about, or their plane went down on the island, or they got stranded there somehow, and they were guarding this little island in the middle of the Pacific for Imperial Japan, even though Imperial Japan had been obliterated with 2 atomic bombs in 1945. They had no idea it ended, and that's what these cultural Marxist college professors of a certain vintage are doing, that have done. When all the things were achieved in terms of the basic civil rights trajectory agenda of the 20th century, they didn't know how to go home and fight the peace. They continued using the college curriculum to continue to fight until they had to invent new causes that were unnecessary in order to justify their existence. On top of that, with the evidence we've seen come out in recent years, it is blatantly obvious to anyone paying any attention that both pederasty and pedophilia are integral parts of the Western intelligentsia's worldview. The intelligentsia do not see any difference between gay rights and giving a pedophile the ability to access, in a sexual way, a child of very young age. To them, it's all part of the same rules for radicals that Soloninsky laid down. Even though the primary objectives had been already achieved, they invented a new spheres, new theaters of conflict, or expanded the present theater of conflict towards things like this. Why are the Western and current and past intelligentsia obsessed with having sex with children? A lot of it comes down to their education in a classical sense. They would have read the Greek classics, Plato, Homer, Euripides, and so on. Socrates. They would have read about the Epicureans, and they would have had all these notions that somehow the intellectual life is established or stimulated through pedophilia. They would have read about the symposiums where you have these great intellectuals of Greek and Athenian society being pleasured by naked young boys, sexually pleasured, while they discussed the fine arts of statesmanship, economics, and scientific theorems, as well as general philosophical outlines. The hand in the air gesturing about the nature of the possibility that everything breaks down into a singular form. One hand in the air, the other hand holding a goblet of wine, and in the middle, a young boy performing oral sex on him. This is what happened in these symposiums. This, you can see it on the Greek pottery, you can read about it in the books, it's all there. So these Western academics from like universities such as Cambridge in England developed a kind of a symposium envy and a belief that somehow their own academic credentials and proficiency would be enhanced by these ideas and these pathological pederast and pedophilic behavior. They would have been, at the time these ideas developed in the 60s, the class system in England was still very, very powerful. It always was, always will be in places like Cambridge. And the professors there would have generally been married at debutantes' balls to some woman they had no sexual attraction to, even if they were heterosexual. She was generally picked on pedigree. This is a thing people don't understand. Irish aristocratic Protestants do this as well. Books of photographs now are done online every year, where eligible women of the aristocracy are farmed out to these professors, these aristocratic types and academics, who treat these women like racehorses for breeding. At the same time, they're doing gender studies and promoting, the most radical forms of feminism and talking about that how working class and middle class men are all sexist barbarians, and yet their own wives have been often picked from a catalogue that was no different than a livestock market of suitable spouses for breeding purposes of the correct pedigree. You see the hypocrisy between the sanctimonious aspects of these elites, and I'll call them elites not because they are the best, but it's because they're at the top. That's just how they are. And like any pathological structure, hypocrisy is not an issue because they see themselves and, if anything, proves this, above the morality or the behavior of the rest of society. This is why you can have the likes of Moby spend all the time attacking Donald Trump over, prostitutes in Russia peeing on him. That didn't happen and was in a false dossier. But even if that happened, Moby is surrounded by people who have sex with children and insert rodents in their anuses. He cannot see the difference between that and regular morality because it's Donald Trump morality. Therefore, it's bad morality. Therefore, Moby has no morality. That's why he posts pictures of himself with his arm around Hillary Clinton, a psychopathic mass murdering war machine, in a skirt, saying how wonderful she is, and Donald Trump is horrible because he made a quote about grabbing by the pussy 15 years ago on a bus as a private citizen that meant nothing. This is their morality. It's different. When they get to be elite, and I do that in quotation marks, the moral demarcations that the rest of us are subject to are not applicable to them. This is why after the Porfumo scandal, when everyone was slandered and shamed and went down in history as brigands and disgraceful people, one of the primary players in that, Prince Philip, the consort of Queen Elizabeth II, was kept out of the courts and his file was sealed until 50 years after his death. Now that's real elite. So therefore, when these college professors are picking wives of debutantes from a catalogue like their livestock, they can preach sexism to the rest of us because it's not applicable to them. It's only applicable to the ones they point the finger at. Likewise with paedophilia. You will have many of these academics speaking about human rights, and then they'll be going to places all over the world and having sex with young children. Coming back home and then having their media say, find some guy who lives in a council estate or in a lower middle class person who has found child porn on his computer. And it may not even be hardcore child porn. It may just be like, tasteless and inappropriate photographs of young girls, maybe underage. That's enough for that guy to have his whole life ruined. But a college professor who's being pleasured by young boys, he's not applicable to that. This is why Jimmy Savile got away with what he did. That Jimmy Savile got away with what he did because he was a member of the quote unquote elite. Friends of the royal family, the biggest TV and radio star of his generation. He was fine. He was no problem. He could do whatever he wanted. No journalist was going to grass him out. And certainly no journalist that protects the elite will ever grass him out, because that journalist or newspaper editor has a vested interest in doing his best, if he's not already there, to become part of the elite themselves. This is why minor criminals are attacked in the newspapers and on TV, but major ones are not. Now, the reason I'm doing this broadcast tonight is because of a story that I said I appeared on the BBC website. That this is it, folks. This is it. The BBC are finally rolling out the ACE card that they have been playing since the late 70s, when they were showing compassion and help to the likes of Jimmy Savile. This announcement by the BBC is a banner moment in the history of both BBC's management's personal agendas and that of cultural Marxism. The BBC management is a bastion of paedophilia. One of the biggest, apart from the fact that they protected Jimmy Savile and sent down people with almost no evidence against them, like Rolf Harris, was to basically keep the spotlight off them. They were not famous. Remember, if a child went into the BBC and had sex with, say, Jimmy Savile, that child knew who Jimmy Savile was. But if Jimmy Savile handed that child over to a general manager or some other programming department head of the BBC to pleasure himself while he reviewed the scripts of the upcoming Play for Today episodes, were portraying working class people as all dysfunctional dogs, drug addicts, wife beaters, and alcoholics, before calling up his dear friend Ken Loach. Can you come over and direct this rather excellent play for today about working class scum in Liverpool? Yes, these working class scum. That you will be making a play about the pathos surrounding the dilemma between a young guy called Spiffy, who's an unemployed scouser, and a drug addict and his alcoholic wife, and the schism between buying drugs and putting food on their table. This kind of thing. Then that kind of thing. And as he's doing this, the little boy who's been handed over by Jimmy Savile is being buggered by him, or he's saying, "Little boy, do you like lollipops? I have big lollipop in my trousers." This kind of thing. Now, years later, when that child becomes an adult, they can point to someone and say, "That's Jimmy Savile." But they can't point to the BBC department head or program director because they don't know this man, this creature from television. So they can't point. So who was the man in the office? I don't know. It'd be like a young Cockney kid. I was taken in, and Jimmy Savile, he had the sex with me, and then I was brought into an office, and there was this man in there, and what was his name? I don't know. He was like Posh. This is the kind of thing, like poor, uneducated, working class little young in Cockney and London boys they would take in there for pleasuring these guys. So we know, should we say, there will be no identification trail towards BBC management as they pleasured themselves in the symposium of Shepherd's Bush. You see, those BBC director generals and programming department managers, I've seen this in RTE in Dublin, by the way, and RTE is a Mickey Mouse operation as big as it is compared to BBC, which is, even back then was a colossal global enterprise. So their symposium would have been like, they would have had their symposium in the executive's canteen, upstairs, smoking cigars and talking about the new shows that are coming out. And I don't much care for this private television, this IT, this independent television, I got my knighthood and I'm happy, this kind of thing. And there would have been the symposium of pedophilia while they selected, Play for Today scripts or EastEnders scripts portraying the working class as dogs and animals and drug addicts and alcoholics. And so this article today is the banner. It's the banner. They were finally setting foot on the promised land of pedophilia that they've so wanted us to explore. Now, not, I mean, us to become pedophiles and do that, but to explore the possibilities of the legalization of child rape. And that way, Uncle Quentin or, Grandfather Tarquin at the BBC won't go down in future generations' history as a pervert. He'll go down as a trailblazer. It'd be like this. This is why I'm very dubious about Stephen Fry now being used as a front for like looking for missing children. He's the last person I'd leave alone with a young boy. Anyway, and that's not because I'm homophobic. It's because he's Stephen Fry. He just gives me the creeps. The fact that he's so glib and empty and tries to be an intellectual. Actually, I kind of feel sorry for Stephen Fry in some way. He kind of reminds me of the English public school boy who was raped on his first night in his private boarding school and has spent the rest of his life trying to deal with it. So a lot of that goes on as well. I do have actually sympathy for those types. But the rest of them, they just want the symposium. They want to. I'm Plato of the BBC. I'm the Socrates of the programming department. And just like Socrates, I'm highly educated and wise. And I also like young boys. And that's what they like. Now, so in generally speaking, the holy and apostolic sacrament of Western intelligentsia for at least the last quarter of a century has been a trajectory leading towards the sanctification and the validation of sex with children. That's what it's been leading to. And today, the BBC launched their Santa Maria Pinta and Nina with this article. And it's called
Pedophiles need help, not condemnation. I should know, and it's a program coming up on the BBC. And it has, now we go to the BBC website, and there's a nice pink banner. The pink thing, the dark pink color, is to associate pedophilia with legitimate things like women's rights, women's equality, and gay rights. See, this is it's been snuck in as a Trojan horse, and the two tags say sex and relationships next to health and well-being, and there's a graphic of a kind of a baby man inside the body of a human surrounded by bricks of a wall that are half built, and it's raining on him. Oh, oh. And anyway, it says it's, and underneath that the caption says, "It's a long time since I described myself as a paedophile." No, because you were probably going around saying, "I am a philosopher. I am an artiste." That's what you were probably calling yourself. And it says here, pedophilia is a disorder, a deeply distressing sexual orientation. No, it isn't. It's a mental illness. For me, it's triggered by traumatic childhood experiences. I'm in my 60s now, and when I was a young boy, my mother used to sit me on her lap while she dried me off after the bath, and she would fondle my genitals. Well, firstly, where's mother? How come she can't speak for herself? You see, this is the first thing. The mother's dead, and the mother can't say she can't speak for herself. The mother, there's no proof this happened. You see, this is what annoys me about this. That's the same level of proof that sends Rolf Harris to prison, i.e., no proof. Continuing, her behavior never felt sexual, but looking back, of course it was. Because it wasn't sexual, she was probably drying you off or something. And you've twisted it around in later life as a justification or a rationalization of your pathological behavior. It's like these motherfuckers who who say, "I beat my wife because I saw my father beat my mother." What? I beat my wife because I saw my father beat my mother and thought it was normal. So your mother cowering in the corner, screaming with blood and bruises on her face while you were half dressed, you thought that was normal. Get the fuck out of here. It's the same kind of rationalization. It's like these women who these bitches you come across on these so-called psychopath and narcissistic recovery forums who claim they met their psychopath or narc or spat on websites like millionairematch.com, because of course they weren't predators. No, the man was. Anyway, her behavior never felt sexual, but looking back, of course it was. Really, I can't remember exactly how long it went on, but it was a long time, meaning you're making it up. By the time it was over, I was self-harming. What does that mean? This reminds me of the Kinsey thing where they used to masturbate babies in the crib to see if they could masturbate them. This is like the same. This the cultural Marxist, the Kinsey pervert. This is all this stuff. We're at war. We're at war here. I hate to sound like Alex Jones, but fucking we're at war. We are at war. They are coming at us now. They're coming for you. They're coming for you, children. I think my attraction, you see, they've been building this up for years. They've been building this up for years. They're using the same template they used for, say, gays and lesbians, but they're piggybacking their perversion on legitimate gay and lesbian adult lifestyles. I think my attraction to young boys came from what my mother did to me. How is that relating to anything? That's just a random sentence thrown out there. That's like saying, I like women because I had a model train set when I was a little boy. And the train going into the tunnel looked like a penis going into a vagina. It means nothing. You see, these are the classic cultural Marxist, mind assaults. These are like blitzkriegs on the consciousness. I first acknowledged my abnormality around age 15. That's when I realized I wasn't changing mentally in the same way other boys were changing. Now, how do you know that was pedophilia? I've known lots of boys, and I actually would include myself in this, that didn't fully mature in the way they society expected. For instance, I kept on reading comic books. I kept on playing board games, which I still do to this day. I kept on doing things I was supposed to. I still have a model train layout. I kept on doing things that I was supposed to be done with by 15. But that was not an abnormality thing. It was just that things like comic books, model trains, model planes, and miniatures and board games gave me tremendous joy as a child. That why did I have to give this up? It doesn't mean I'm not interested in girls or rock and roll or dating or going to disco dancing. It doesn't mean of none of those things. I'm substituting one for the other. You see, this is how they twist it around. They invent these arbitrary templates of human existence that are completely grey and vague, and then they impose demarcation lines on them, and then apply them to something else. So, not maturing to be, say, like not being into getting drunk at the back of the school. I did when I was a very extremely. What I have to say, I know you don't believe me, but I never touched drink, cigarettes, or drugs until I was much, much older. And this is what boys at 15 were doing in my school. I wasn't interested in that. I was still interested in the things I've been interested in, as well as supplemental things like music and rock and roll and punk and things like that. So that's when I wasn't changing mentally. So he wasn't into the stuff that boys were into at say 15 and 16. So that means he's a pedophile. They were taking an interest in women, or in one or two cases in men. Now, how do you know? This is the liar again. How, if he's 60 odd now and he was 15, there was no way that boys in the class when he was in school back in the 1950s was going, "Oh, George, I'm, while the other boys were out last night with the ladies, I was fucking Roger behind the school." He didn't do that. So this is how I know he's lying. He's a liar. Like all pedophiles, he's a liar. There's no way boys back in the 50s were talking about exploring their sexuality with other men. It didn't happen. But I never did. I remained fixated on pre adolescent boys, which was at the age at which I've been sexually interfered with. Lies, lies. This is all that Keynesian, Freudian stuff where everything about a human being is reduced down to their sexual responses. And then that becomes the shall we say the hex that they put themselves under in order to justify their behavior later on. Yes, I know sex is traumatic. Yes, I'm very aware that gay men go through hard times and lesbians went through hard times in the past as they were becoming gay or straight and feeling like outsiders and being in pain and all this. Yes, I know that. But that's not the same thing as this. It's not. The attraction to little boys is power. When he was reaching a certain age, he probably realized that among boys who were also 15, he wasn't in control. He wasn't a leader. He was probably a subordinate to the social structure of the school. Therefore, what does the pedophile then think then? Well, who can the 15-year-old pedophile who's not who's in a subordinate position within his peer group, who can he boss around? Yes, younger boys. And that's where the pedophilia really begins. It's power. And that's where the sexual thing comes into it. It's power over younger children because they cannot produce it and they associate the sexual conquest of children with putting them in a leadership position. And this is why they are not people who have a sexual lifestyle. They are monsters like psychopaths. It was horrible. And that's given a whole line by itself. I'll post this article on the video and upload. It was horrible. And underneath that, the little sad thing like that video, like he's on his own and he's drawing a wee little picture of the sad eyes. And across from are two jolly boys, and they're looking at a copy of Playboy, and they're going, oh, look at it, look at the baps on her. And then there's sort of like a weird triangle effect in the background. This is kind of interesting, and a map of the world. And I'm not part of I'm not part of the social structure. I'm outside the pyramid. I'm on the steps of the pyramid. Oh, poor me. Oh, I'm a good boy though. I'm doing my homework, so it means I'm good in every other way. I never even contemplated abusing a child. No, because you're not abusing the child in your mind. You've dehumanized the child, and therefore the child is a device. So therefore, it's not a child. It's no more abuse than if you suck the orange juice out of a carton and crush it. That's what it's not abuse to you because that's what you're doing. You're sucking the life force out of a child like an orange carton and you're crushing it and throwing it away. It's a million miles from what I wanted to be, which was a normal adult man. Now, that's probably the first true statement you said. You wanted to be in a leadership position among your peers. You couldn't. So, like those English public school boys, those form boys who pick on the house boys below them, it's a form of it's a class system of a sort based on hierarchies of domination and control. I hope that I grew older. I grow into adult sexual orientations, but it was like my development had stalled. No, I don't believe you. You had actually figured you'd probably already intimidated a young boy and already felt the power rush of that, and you were not going to give that up to try and date girls or date adult men. It was completely terrifying. I felt revolted with myself. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You didn't. If you felt revolted with yourself, you wouldn't have done it. I realized that it was like, or you would have done it once and felt disgusted by it and never did it again. I realized that it was likely that I would lead a very lonely life. Oh, and I was scared that if people found out about my terrible thoughts, it could lead to violence, physical attacks. Of course it would. It's a human being's uh, natural inclination to protect a child from an adult, whether that adult wants to beat the child up, psychologically torture the child, or stick his penis in the child. That's why there's violence and physical attacks against you lot. It's a natural human inclination to protect children because they can't fucking protect themselves from you bastards. I went to university. Well, of course you did. You went at those. Now you've given your class away. So you're 60s now. So you're definitely from the upper class. So you're probably a BBC general director or something. You see, we're finding out who you are now. I went to uni. So I'm talking in this real accent. I went to university where I had a group of friends and we spent several years battling against the reality of my mental state. What does that mean? I went to university where I had a group of friends and spent several years battling against the reality of my mental state. No, no, it's not a mental state, right? And these people who say all sex is rooted in the mind, yeah, a lot of sexuality in terms of things like seduction and in terms of fantasies is rooted in the mind. But any man, once he starts having sex, his brain switches off. There's billions of pregnant women all over the world who can attest to that. This is the mental state of sexuality is prior to intercourse. It's not during it. So it's not a mental state. It's almost like building when a man has a sexual fantasies about an adult woman or an adult man, he's building a kind of a magical scenario. And the same with women, they're building a magical scenario in their head of this to come to pass, and that's what's exciting. Not That's why things like you can find the strangest things sexually exciting, like a woman who you were really fancied had a certain brand of perfume, and 20 years later you get a whiff of that and you get horny again. It's about that's where the mental part of it is. It's a peacockish form of magical mind ballet. It's not a predominant mental state. I had there's no you could not the same way you could not find a pedophile in the brain. You just won't. So it's now he's trying to make out that he's got a mental problem, which he does, but it's not one based on psychosis. He doesn't want to control it. That's the difference. I had almost no sexual experience at the time. Almost no sexual experiences. Almost no. So he's the little posh boy in college, and he said almost no sexual experience. So I'd like to know what the real ones were. I eventually forced I was eventually forced to face the fact that I wasn't changing when I was outed by a housemate. Now you see, now he's like he was queer bashed, no, or something. He was outed, so he was outed by a housemate as a paedophile. I guess he had noticed that it started when we if we started about talking about children, I would change the subject. Oh, I doubt that very much. I doubt that. These are awful liars. If we walked down the street and saw a family with children, I would get uncomfortable. And then there's a picture underneath. There's a picture underneath him of him walking away from a nice family with two babies, and the mammy's pushing two kids, and the mammy's pushing a baby in a pram. And the whole scene was ominous. They're all bathed in red light, this kind of thing. I have to check out the artist Loren Boglio. We'll look at him later. I was sitting in the front room. All my mates were cooking the evening meal, and I don't think I realized I'd come downstairs. They were chatting away, and I heard my friend say something like, I think Jack's interested in young boys. Ah, here we go. Why did Jack think that? I put on my coat and quietly walked out of the house. Oh, walking out the front door was like leaving one world and entering another. I went to the university GP the next day and said, I'm a paedophile. Can this be cured? The convention. Oh, here we go. So he's going to be now. We're going to get the whole story. I haven't even read the rest of it. We're going to get the whole story now, like the stories what they did to gay people with electric shock therapy. The conventional view of pedophilia is that it's an incurable condition. Yes, that's true. But this doctor laughed. He laughed and said, "Of course it's curable." It was an absolute huge relief. The doctor didn't challenge my identification with pedophilia. He just accepted it and says, "No problem. We'll sort it out." And then he's in the doctor's office, like, I'm a pedophile. Can you cure me? I got a referral letter to the Portman Clinic, which, amongst other services, offers special treatment for people with problematic sexual behaviors. But you don't have a problematic sexual, you have a domination thing. I went to London for my assessment a few weeks later. It was the midsummer's day in 1972, and I remember walking along Hampstead Heath, watching the trees, listening to the birds, and thinking, I'm going to get a new life. The Portman Clinic's treatments are long term. I was seen by them for several years. You talk freely, and over time, they construct a picture of your subconscious drivers. After treatment, I was a very different person. I even developed a sexual interest in women, which felt extraordinarily liberating. But there was still a lot about me that was shy, inexperienced, and naive. So they're trying to make it that he's really a straight man trapped inside a pedophile's body, a straight adult man. In a sense, I had to experience my adolescence years after my peers. I had minimal sexual experience. That's quite common. There's nothing weird about that. I know fellas who didn't get laid until they were well into their 20s. So some people find it hard to get laid or pick up women. Some people are shy. I'm still shy around women. I had minimal sexual experiences. All my friendships had been wrapped by my self hatred and a huge lack of self esteem. I'm now in a good relationship and have been for a long time with a woman I love. She was also known about my former orientation, which will always be something I carry with me, but no one else knows, not in my family. So he must have got his debutante, like I was talking about earlier on, out of the catalogue. He must have got it out of the catalogue. He got his filly. He got his filly. I've since done things that I'm proud of in my life. They're not huge achievements, but they're achievements nonetheless. Aren't you wonderful? If I've got one regret, it's that I'm only now doing this kind of advocacy work for pedophiles. Now he's a pedophile advocate. So now he's cured and he should be forgetting about pedophiles, right? And moving on with his woman. But no, he's now doing advocacy work for pedophiles. Why? Because, excuse me, because he isn't. He isn't cured. I work with a charity called Stop So, a specialist treatment organisation for the prevention of sexual offending. It's a UK-wide organisation offering therapy to anyone who feels at risk of committing a sexual violence. What about the targets? What about the people who are attacked? And then there's a little picture of that picture of the little boy man inside the adult. Paedophilia is not understood. It's in one line all by itself, like a banner headline. Now we've had we've had the story to soften you up, right? The poor guy, his mammy raped him. His housemates did the unspeakable thing of noticing he was into something, but nothing happened. He had a privileged lifestyle. He went to university when only posh people went to university. He got his filly from the catalogue, and he's now helping people. And now they deliver the money shot. Pedophilia is not understood. You've been softened up, and here's where the sales pitch comes in. People think pedophilia if you read my book Animal of the Psyche, I will show you how to read news stories. People think pedophilia is synonymous with child sex abuse, but I would never have abused a child. Liar. Most pedophiles have two warning drivers within them: the urge to offend and the urge to be normal. I disagree completely. If they have the urge to be normal, why, when they find pornography in their houses, is it not 100 images? It's 80, 50, 70,000 images of thousands of young boys or girls. What's that? Where's the urge to be normal in that? Most pedophiles are desperate for those desires to go away. That's not true, because it's all about domination and control. He found his domination and control by obviously founding a submissive woman. There are online communities where non-offending pedophiles can support each other. Yeah, and they're probably like Jared Fogle. They go into the chat rooms on the side and they share their great stories. I once discovered a woman online who was exactly like me. Now, you see, women are pedophiles as well. She was attracted to. You see, this story started out that his mother was a pedophile. You understand? Immediately, the gaslighting began by pointing out that women are the initial pedophiles, not men. So, like, no women were sexually abusing young children at the BBC. It was men. They've switched it around now to actually it's women who are the pedophiles, and men are caused by them. I discovered one woman online who was exactly like me. She's attracted to infants of the age at which I had been abused. She also received therapy for her treatment of pedophilia. But the demonizations of pedophiles, what do you expect? Makes it more difficult for non-offending young people who are worried about developing this sexual orientation. It's not a sexual. You see the gaslighting? It's not a sexual orientation. I think every town in the country should have a clinic like the Portman. Yes, so a lot of pedophiles can network. It becomes integral to the community. Pedophiles then don't be seen as dangerous, and therefore it becomes legal. But we're far from that. Wait until you hear the next line. I think in every town in the country should have a clinic like the Portman. But we're far from that. NHS budgets have been cut. So the healthcare services in Britain have been cut. So therefore, pedophiles deserve their little network as much as people who are disabled, have no legs, have Angelman syndrome, who have all kinds of real psychiatric problems. No, not develop. Let's add pedophiles into that as people to help them develop their sexual orientation. He's now a victim of government cutbacks. Excuse me, this is driving me mad. In the whole field of psychiatric and mental health care, we should be identifying sexually damaged young people. I agree with that, but they're damaged usually by people, by you, and potential abusers. Yeah, and treating them early as we can. This is a key to break the cycle of sexual abuse. No, it's not a cycle. You don't. This is the same thing as the wife beaters. The wife beaters used the same excuse. Oh, my old man beat my wife up, and then I had to slap her around. No, a normal person knows that's wrong, and they don't do it. You use you're just looking for excuses. Instead, if you're a pedophile who's been offended, you may want help, but it's very rare to get treatment on the NHS. Of course not. Of course it should be. You should be getting, if anyway you should be getting treatment, it's in prison. Most of the time, you'll only get help after you offended or already hurt someone. I was lucky because of the help I got. I've been able to live a normal adult life with your filly, and I've been able to address my issues. I don't believe this story in any way. Follow these links if you've been affected by sexual abuse, and it finishes with that, and then health and well-being tag at the end. Let's have a look at this artist who has great sympathy for the nonsense. It doesn't really have anything on them, just the close of the artwork. Maybe in the bottom, maybe a link from the bottom. Hold on. No. Let's have a look at the Stop Soul website. You see, pedophilia makes me sick, and I got a lot of shit a few years ago for not believing the Hampstead story, and I still don't believe it because the evidence isn't there. But that doesn't mean I don't believe those things happen and go on. We can't have a blanket situation where, if someone makes an accusation, everyone's automatically guilty. That's not how I operate. I don't come from a witch hunt mentality. I don't come from that kind of mentality. I go with evidence. And the evidence I know is that pedophiles can't be cured. And if they do get married, it's a front. It's a front. And this is just all about sexual offending. This is regular sexual offending. And while I have no problem with this at all, what this guy and the BBC are attempting to do is to begin the journey on the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria towards the promised land. The promised land where they can have their symposiums and go back to being pederasts legally and go back to pleasuring themselves at young boys. The first step to that, this is like saying, the whole thing of like Christopher Columbus wanted to sail across the Atlantic because he said it would give them a passage to India. He'd go right. He didn't know. He believed that there was India was over there. And when he went around the world, he discovered he landed in the Caribbean. That's why it's called the West Indies. And then he started killing the Indians, the natives on these islands, and then eventually exterminating all of the United States. But the promised land to get there was the promise of getting to India. This is what they're doing. They're using this. They're launching the BBC are launching the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria with the promise of curing pedophilia, when in reality it is a Trojan horse for the legalization of pedophilia. The link is below. I don't want to talk about this anymore. It's making me sick. The website is www.thomassheridan.com. My open source occult TV website, which I want to get back to because I feel disgusted right now about documentaries on the occult and stuff, is up there on YouTube. I've got loads of books on my website. Good night. Talk to you next time. Thank you. We can't take a joke.
Need for salvation is a very interesting thing, especially when people talk about their independence, their free will. If you need someone to save you, or you need a counter culture or mainstream culture savior, someone who validates your opinions, you're really a slave. Suffering from a disease, and the disease is that you have not understood that the problem is really your belief in external salvation beyond yourself. If you didn't need to feel this desire to have an authority figure or a celebrity or a politician validate and express your feelings, you wouldn't need these saviors in the first place. And this is the root of the problem. We are very carefully controlled from the time we're children to have a sort of the need or a savior.
There is no turning back. You got to face the truth. It's all you have to do. Hit the ground and run. Take a second glance towards the rising sun.
You grow up with that picture of Jesus Christ with his Dionysian beard and long hair, and his softness and his Aryan looks. And you believe that, deep in your subconscious, that this is someone you need. But you're missing the point completely. Believe. Pop, culture. We have been given saviors in the belief they are our only path to salvation. The only route to salvation is your own ass. Accept it and please deal with it.